What lurks behind this unassuming storefronts in Cleveland, Ohio? It's the Buckland Museum of Witchcraft and Magic. Learn the history of Wicca and the tale of those who brought it to the United States. See the tools of magic, once used by practitioners of the arcane arts. It's the Buckland Museum of Witchcraft and Magic. Welcome back to the Buckland Museum Frankenstein radio controls. This time we're broadcasting someplace very remote, very strange, someplace that nobody's ever been but me. And I'm quite enjoying it. Got away for a couple days. But today is a very important day in the history of occult arts as the opening of Beyond the Pleasuredome. And this is a exhibit celebrating Burt Shonberg, the great occult artist. I don't really have a lot to say about that we're not going to discuss here in the intro. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I am just going to kick it over to the, I guess we would call him the producer of this exhibit, a individual named Steven Romano, who, if you've tuned in on these, you know very well. So, Steven, welcome back to the Buckland Museum Frankenstein radio controls.
It is absolutely epic, unforgettable, something that we've worked for years. And I can tell you my associate, the curator of the exhibition, Brian Chidester, has worked on this for decades. So to have the first show of Burt Shonberg's art in over 50 years. It's been 50 years since, more than 50 years since his work's been shown. He only had one show during his lifetime, 1967, I believe it was, and was produced by George Grief, who was the man who was responsible for bringing the Beatles to America. And he passed the baton over to what I would say my mentor in this project, a man who's made incredible contributions to American culture, Marshall Berle. And I just want to give a huge shout out to Marshall Berle. And I don't believe in coincidences, okay? But today is Marshall Berle's birthday, of all things. So Marshall was Burt Shonberg's manager, a friend to him, perpetuated him during his lifetime. Marshall was manager of the band Spirit, Randy, California, who used Burt's art on their Spirit of 76 album. Incredible album and beautiful graphics. Marshall was also manager of a fledgling little band from, I think it was Pasadena, called Van Halen. Brought them to perpetuity, brought them to Ted Templeman and produced their first album. He was manager of Ike and Tina Turner, Little Richard. I mean, the list is exhaustive, right? So I just wanted to give a special shout out to Marshall. Wish him a very happy birthday and embrace him for his generosity of spirit throughout this whole project. Back to you, brother.
All right. Wow. Happy birthday. So I think we should introduce Brian here, Brian Chidester, who is the curator of the exhibit. Brian, where are you coming in from?
I am in Greenpoint in Brooklyn, just across the East River from Manhattan.
Oh, cool. Awesome. So where did you discover Burt Shonberg? How did you discover this great artist?
It actually sort of fell into my lap. It was kind of a mistake, like all the best projects really are. But it was, I think, 2000. I was living in Los Angeles at the time, and I was really into the psychedelic Beach Boys and the composer of Nature Boy. And Dick Dale and surf music and all that. And I went to the Pasadena City College swap meet like I did the first Sunday of every month. And there I found a little fanzine or just a zine from like 1958 called Les Petites Sphinx, a coffee house review. And it was a whole little publication devoted to just coffee houses in the greater Los Angeles area. And I didn't really even know that there were that many coffee houses to begin with, but in there, I saw an ad for the Cafe Frankenstein done in this sort of cubist beatnik style, and underneath it said Schonberg. And then I went through a few more of the pages, and there was actually like a 3-page spread of the interior of the Frankenstein with all these great murals that had Kabbalistic symbols and exploding atomic bombs. And I mean, it was really, Steven's holding up Les Petites Sphinx right now. That's number 5. Schonberg did the cover, and that was actually one of the last ones I found. It was number 3 or 4, I think, was the one I found at the swap meet. And then after that, there was really nothing online about Schonberg in 2000. So I went to the library in Laguna Beach, and in the microfilm, I found all of the information that I could on the Frankenstein. And because it had mentioned all these other artists and filmmakers and whatnot, I just started reaching out to them if I could find them in any way. In 2001, Marshall Berle, who Steven referred to, put up a website, burtshonberg.com, and that really broadened my horizons. On there, he mentioned a guy named LeDrew Baker Shootman III, who was Bert's roommate for about 13 years in Seal Beach. And I got in touch with LeDrew, and he was actually still living in the same apartment that he and Bert shared in Seal Beach. So I would go down there maybe every week or every other week and go through Bert's portfolio. And it basically had drawings and tear sheets and pages from magazines, pulp magazines, horror magazines, or pinup magazines that he drew for. And then LeDrew was the one who really told me, you know, this ephemeral stuff or things that he did for as work to hire was really cosmic in its own way, and Bert really used the opportunities he had in the commercial realm to push the envelope, but that he had this much deeper personal oeuvre of paintings and drawings that were lived somewhere between the occult and early psychedelic artwork. And once I started seeing some of those images from LeDrew and also from Marshall Berle, who I met personally later, I started to feel like there was a really significant artist here, and I tried to do what I could over the years to amass the information that would allow us to figure out where all of the art was and why Bert had been a forgotten figure. And so it took quite a while to get the basics of the story down in terms of facts. But in 2015, I wrote a story for the LA Weekly about Bert, and then things went from there. There's been a biography about him by a writer named Spencer Kanza, a film that Marshall Berle himself directed, and then now this exhibition.
Which I have to, I mean, look at the way that Steven's smiling over there. He is so excited to be able to share this with. The way I discovered him, I guess I listened to a podcast, Expanding Mind, with Eric Davis, where he talked to Spencer, right? And I was just like, oh, wow, this is cool. This is all part of that whole, like, zone. Marjorie Cameron, of course, came up a number of times. It seems like maybe they only had a relationship for maybe a year or so. But she seems to have, like, really been a heavy presence in his headspace. So, of course, I was interested with that, with Marjorie Cameron, and, of course, her whole thing that radiates out of her. But we were at Steven's apartment, and right behind Steven there is a painting, which completely flipped our wig. I was with my friend Matthew, and needed to know more. And, well, that's kind of what brought us here. What is it about his art that, like, makes it more important than the rest, like, in your opinion? And then I want to hear Steven's opinion on that.
A couple things. I think when you're trying to talk about somebody who is a forgotten or important figure in the 20th century, what you really have to focus on is the reasons why somebody like that would be forgotten. Bert really didn't make any technical breakthroughs like in abstraction or cubism or surrealism. Because he was an illustrator, he could pastiche that stuff, and he did blend them in ways that most of the other mainstream artists that we know in cubism or surrealism or abstract expressionism didn't. But he was more of a pictorialist. His interest was in subject matters, not necessarily in a narrative sense, but he presented subject matters from horror, from the occult, from science fiction, in a way that was they were more like tantric images, where you could basically look at them and sort of start to divine yourself in the midst of having this visionary experience. And I think, you know, we can try to say that he was influenced by Dali or Picasso or De Chirico or even Marjorie Cameron, but I think where his own importance starts to rise up is in his willingness to take on these subjects that pretty much guaranteed that the mainstream art establishment was going to reject him. So from that vantage, we can try to then make an argument that he belongs in the canon. But I think what he really does is his art sort of points to how shallow and money-driven and ideological the art establishment is, because here you have somebody who is more of, instead of having a traditional philosophy where, you know, you're using that philosophy to basically confirm all of your biases, Bert was waiting for things to reveal themselves. And I think that's what you get out of his work. He could use pretty much any modern art format that he wanted, but the thing that made him stand out was the visionary aspect, the fact that they were constantly revealing themselves, almost like nature revealing itself the longer you look at things or the longer you're in nature. And to me, that makes him really significant, but it also makes him a difficult sell, because I think the first thing that people will do is they'll say it's genre art, it's narrative art. The 20th century is about, you know, abstraction and these formal breakthroughs or whatever. And so Schonberg doesn't really fit into that. Even though he could master those things, I think he sort of is somewhere in the abyss artistically. There's nobody really like him. There's nobody who really took those styles either and integrated them into something that was so dark and visionary. You know, they all seem to sort of come out of a similar pool. And here's Schonberg over by himself, struggling to get his ideas onto canvas. I think in that way, he really stands out, and that makes him unique and special.
Steven, do you have a version of that?
That's why we let Brian do the talking. You know, it's brilliant. So for me, I was doing a show in my gallery in around 2015, I think. It was a show of this artist. I can't remember where she lives now. It's somewhere overseas. Her name is Ratika Merchant. And around the same time, there was this other show, Esoteric exhibition curated by Pam Grossman, which was called The Language of Birds. It was a big hit. And somebody had reviewed the two exhibitions together and paired them up together. This guy, Brian Chidester. And I was like, the writing in the review was profound. I just thought, wow, this guy really gets it, right? I mean, to an extraordinary extent. So somehow he and I made contact, and he came to my gallery in Bushwick, and we just completely hit it off. It was like a meeting of the minds, right? And he brought up the subject of Burt Shonberg, who wasn't someone I had heard about. And I have an extensive background in what's most commonly referred to as outsider art. You know, I was the manager of the Rico Moresca Gallery for 8.5 years, where we showed all the major artists in that field. So somehow that Schonberg had, Schonberg, although he was trained academically, was he basically rejected that training and was working outside of the mainstream, outside of the academic continuum. So the fact that I had never heard of him, really piqued my curiosity and started to look into him. And I think, without sounding patronizing, because of the fact that I was really impressed with Brian, I paid special attention to this. I thought, oh, this must be something. So I started to look into it and really dug the work. I mean, how do you say, the metaphysical aspect of the work, how these things are basically, portals into another dimension or another way of seeing, and how you have to sharpen how they sharpen your own perceptual senses while interacting with them in a very authentic way. I thought was so engaging and very, very unique. But the more I looked into Schonberg, there was a memory that was nagging at me, right? There's a memory from childhood that was nagging at me, and I finally nailed it about a year ago. When I was really young, growing up in Montreal, I was making art, drawing from the time I think I was 3 or 4, right? And I had an aunt who was a recognized abstract artist there who perpetuated me. She brought me art supplies and books on Hieronymus Bosch and Dürer and Francis Bacon and all the difficult art stuff, right? So I was really immersed in that. And I suddenly recalled these images of Schonberg's. I remember we had a black and white TV, right, in the basement. And I remembered my first scary movie I ever saw was The House of Usher, Roger Corman's film. And I remembered the psychological and emotional impact in particular that the paintings in that film had on me, and how it was like an affirmation for me that the esoteric art and the darker art was a very powerful force to be reckoned with, that the impact it had on me was lasting throughout the rest of my life. And it was only really about a year ago when I really started looking into Schonberg that I realized that's the guy who made those paintings that had such a huge impact on me when I was young, and was really formative in terms of my own aesthetic and my own sensibilities that I perpetuate. So it's kind of come full circle in a really magnificent way. And they're so on this journey to perpetuate this exhibition. There's been so many. What do you call them? Affirmations, right? So many little affirmative signs that have just completely encouraged me along the way. And as I keep saying, today's a magnificent special day, and we're so thrilled to have this exhibition at the Buckland Museum of Witchcraft and Magick. It's a perfect fit. I can't hear Steven. Can you hear him, Brian?
No, I don't hear him.
Yeah, we can't hear you.
Sorry, I was making a lot of sound, so I muted myself. But I am so thrilled to have this that I'm not even thinking straight enough to take the microphone off. So you're talking about the idea of the tantric art, the art that can change you. And I have to say that there's one piece that's becoming almost an obsession to me. All right. And I am wondering, perhaps, Brian, do you have any backstory to this piece right here?
Well, it was painted by Bert, I believe, in 1961. It was not, a title was not written on it, and George Clayton Johnson, who bought it from Bert in the early 60s and was somewhat of a patron of Bert, thought of it. I saw it in his house. I visited George many times when I lived in LA, and he considered it to be a painting about Lucifer, which I would tend to agree with. On the right knee is a homunculus, which is a miniature version of oneself that is created by the alchemist. So and also the sphinxes sort of point back to the alchemists, or the early alchemists in Egyptian tradition. The moon in the kind of center top left is a moon with the sun behind it, which is the symbol of male and female union. And he's set within a garden that has all kinds of intricate patterning, but also washes to give it somewhat of a translucent feeling to it. It's a massive painting. It's probably half the size of a wall in most people's apartments. And yet it's not really a narrative painting at all. You sort of follow the blank eyes of the figure into his own mind or into his own soul. And it starts to lose that difference between what's around him and what's within him. The two start to kind of compound together, which was really a big thing for Bert in 1960-61 when he was taking LSD 25 under the supervision of experimental psychologist Dr. Janiger. And one of the things that Bert wrote about those experiences was that he felt that he was seeing no place at all, that he was just right here in the present, and that what was inside of him was fluidly translating back and forth to what was outside of him. So I think in a way, this is kind of the end of the road and maybe the magnum opus of his era, creating occult art based around the ideas of Aleister Crowley and Marjorie Cameron's influence on him. And the next wave where he would go more creating sort of humanoids or kind of abstract images in the sky. And those were based on his LSD experiences and also other psychedelic experiences. He started experimenting with peyote pretty heavily in 1964. I should say that's probably one of the reasons why him and Marshall actually met and were able to be good friends. Marshall had an experience like that, according to Marshall himself, where he then saw one of Bert's paintings and said, I basically have to meet this guy. I think he's experienced the same thing I have. And it turned out that they did, and they shared a really cosmic friendship for, about 15 years. But yeah, I would say that this is sort of a tantric image, even though it features Lucifer and some figures that we can detect. It's not tethered to any known image of Lucifer in art history. Bert has him leaning against a tree because it's very pensive and contemplative. And for that reason, it draws you into your own sense of contemplation through the eyes of Lucifer. Lucifer being, the angel of light, somebody who was rejected by God for seeking wisdom and knowledge. And I think in a way, Bert is giving you this experience where you can go into the painting so that you can imagine your own way of deviating from convention and finding your own path. I think that's the one key to Bert's art throughout all of it, is that it's really about the esoteric journey to oneself.
So I do want to say that Kelfire Broy says, thank you all, this is fascinating, but unfortunately I have to drop off. Will be available after the fact. And yes, you can, all our live streams are archived on our Facebook and our YouTube channel. So thank you for tuning in. I have to say that this painting, myself, my own experience of it, is incredibly heavy. I stare into it every time I look at it. I've had it on the wall for a few days in the museum. I stare into it, and it's almost like all secrets can be revealed within this. One thing that I've been kind of curious about is the Tower of Babel in the background, because I'm pretty sure, 100% sure that's what that is. Here, underneath the tower, there's a entity. It looks like some kind of hominid or humanoid creature coming out, but it also looks like maybe a ship with a reflection in the sea. I don't know. I absolutely love it. So
it's a masterpiece for the ages.
It truly is. It truly is. So one other thing I'm very curious about with his art, the Sphinxes. He's always very drawn to them, hey?
Yes, Sphinxes appear throughout Schonberg's oeuvre going back to 1955 in some drawings that he did for pulp magazines or some drawings that he did for friends. I think, he obviously was in touch with occult history, and Egyptology was a huge part of the symbolism of theosophy, anthroposophy, spiritualism, and secret societies. And so Bert was tapping into that, and also the OTO, Crowley's organization. So, but he, like a lot of
was he involved with the OTO? Was he a member of the secret?
We don't know that.
Okay.
Well,
there's no member rank. Well, it is a secret society, of course. So. Right. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interject.
No, that's okay. But we really don't know. I never had any evidence that was presented to me that he was a member of OTO, other than his association with Marjorie Cameron, who was definitely core in that regard. And I should say that he's probably not very dogmatic either in his drawings of the occult, unlike Cameron's work, where you can clearly see various figures that she's trying to document, including contemporary figures. It's really hard to say with Bert whether there was any narrative aspect at all to them. Obviously, Frankenstein or Lucifer, or he has another painting of Atlantis, or as you pointed out, the Tower of Babylon or the homunculus on Lucifer's knee, point to the fact that he was familiar with a lot of occult symbology and a lot of occult iconography, but he really takes it, as I said, out of narration or the narrative storytelling device, and he makes them more basically about the personal experience. So you're really going inward. The figures sort of become like a gateway to go inward rather than pointing to anything having to do with occult orthodoxy. We just don't really know how much he adopted that in his personal practice and how much of it was just part of his creative practice. But I'm not really sure it matters either, because I think what sets his art apart is that he's dealing with esoteric forms in a really different and new way than anybody else had up to that point, and maybe ever.
So I'm very curious about one thing. Does anybody have any idea of, when you talk to his friends, do they describe who he was as a person? Was he a joker? Was he a serious man? Was he a bohemian? Was he always just like Maynard Krebs? What kind of, do you know what kind of individual he was? Like, how did he come across to the people around him?
I met a number of his friends over the years, including George Clayton Johnson, who co-owned the Cafe Frankenstein with him. I met with George a lot, and the collection that you have on the wall mostly comes from artworks that George bought or was given by Bert. I knew, like I said, I knew LeDrew Baker Shootman, who was Schonberg's roommate for 7 years until he died, and visited him many, many, many times at their apartment. There were others, Sid Sofer, who ran the Cafe Frankenstein and eventually ended up opening the Sid's Blue Beat Cafe in Newport Beach, which is probably one of the 2 or 3 longest lasting beatnik coffee houses in existence. It's still going now, I think. I hope it survived COVID. And all of them said that, he had a good sense of humor. He was quiet. He was, but he was given to provocation. When the local Ladies Church League tried to get the Cafe Frankenstein shut down in 1958, Bert erected a Frankenstein doll in the front yard and crucified him upside down. They did a lot of pinup and burlesque magazine shoots inside the Frankenstein and actually got arrested on a couple of occasions for doing so. And I think in that way, he was sort of a natural provocateur. He naturally push the envelope on things. I don't think he had to try real hard at it. But when it came to his artwork and reaching the mainstream art galleries and museum world, it was one too far. I don't think we're talking about a difference of essential merit here so much as demographic difference. Bert came out of the applied arts. He came out of illustration. But his mind was like Quicksilver, and he was able to integrate any interest he had very quickly into his art. So personality-wise, I think he was just somebody who, from what I can tell, had a lot going on upstairs, but was a pretty esoteric and out there figure who people enjoyed being around. LeDrew also told me that they would get sheets of acid, puzzles, or various like old pieces of paper that were dipped in acid that they could just take it, rip a piece off, and put it in their mouth until they hallucinated. And he said that they loved acid and they took it all the time. So Schonberg, in a way, was kind of Ayurvedic in that he was willing to test things on himself before he recommended them or put them out there for others. But I think at the heart of it all, he's somebody who had something to say. He wasn't trying to make art that was abstract and somewhat inscrutable and have critics talk about, materials and surfaces or whatnot. He wanted people to be absorbed in the work and to understand it. So in that way, I think as wild and as esoteric as it was also really direct. And maybe that's what you're feeling when you look at Lucifer. That's certainly what I felt the more pieces that I was introduced to in the early 2000s. I just completely felt under the spell of this artist. And at the time, I was really insecure about it because I thought, I don't need to have another rejection from the art world, which I was already trying to penetrate as a historian. And I felt like this guy was ripe for rejection. But the work was that good and that important that I just, for some reason, stayed with it over the years. Your mic's off.
Thank you very much, Brian. We're very thankful that you did the work on here. So one of the great mysteries is House of Usher and his work with Roger Corman. We are so really thrilled for the publication of the catalog, which should be ready here in a couple days. Steven has the proof right there, which looks absolutely stunning and beautiful.
It is. It's incredible. They did the Magick extended to this. And
can you show some of the gatefolds, Steven?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, look at that. That is...
we didn't want to spoil the works by shrinking them down so you couldn't see the detail. And we also didn't want to wreck it by having the work guttered. So we devised this very clever gatefold, which was, a little more of an expense, but we thought, hey, the work really deserves it. So,
and I want to say that if you are interested in this work, please visit the website bucklandmuseum.org. I'm taking pre-orders for it right now. And oh my gosh, it's stunning. This is something that belongs in any director's home.
We have a director's foreword by Steven. We were very blessed to get accolades from, let me see if I can pronounce the name properly, Robert Cozzolino, who's the curator at the Minneapolis Institute of Arts. There's a show that he curated that's touring right now called Supernatural America, which is just absolutely incredible. Steven saw it at the Toledo Art Museum. I have some things on loan in the show from my own personal collection. But to get the endorsement of a curator that's in such high regard, I think will do wonders for Bert's, for magnifying the importance of the project. And then we were also very fortunate to get this, which was, I asked Roger Corman's people. For Roger would provide a quote, and I just expected a little, small paragraph. But he gave us a short memoir of his time with Bert. That the generosity of spirit from Roger Corman has been magnificent. Then we have some little stills here, and then of course, I mean, we've all been listening to Brian. What's the word? Speak so magnificently about the art, in ways that penetrate the psyche and really reveal the emotional and psychological depths to the work. But so, Brian's the curator of the show, and he's provided us with, I think, one of the best pieces of art writing I've ever read. And, I've worked with incredible writers like Thomas McEvely, and this to me is really hits the nail on the head in so many ways, so many unexpected ways. That you see the work so much more profoundly after reading Brian's observations. And we have a little bit quotes from Bert himself, and I highly recommend anyone who's interested to grab this, because I believe this is the only exhibition catalog of Burt Shonberg's art. Am I correct in that, Brian?
Yeah, there was a pamphlet that George Greif put out for the 1967 exhibition, which I think is kind of a funny little pamphlet, because on there it says, it's almost like a Carney piece. It's like, he does Impressionism, he does Cubism, he does Surrealism. Wow, 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 come see it. It's like, step right up. And I don't know if that's Bert sort of making fun of the whole need to categorize things, and sort of, or if that's Gary kind of, or George, I always call him Gary Greif. It's George trying to actually like put him in categories so that he can be more sellable. It's a mystery. But it's definitely got a bit of ballyhoo to it, whereas I think the catalog that we produced takes things a lot more seriously and elevates them to, I don't know, another level of insight. To go back to what Steven was asking about Bert's involvement with Roger Corman, I'm pretty sure that came via Forrest J. Ackerman, or Forry Ackerman, who was the publisher of the magazine Famous Monsters of Filmland, and also one of the, if not the greatest collectors of science fiction and horror movie memorabilia. Forey lived in Los Angeles for most or all of his life, I believe. He coined the term sci-fi. He had the first science fiction convention in 1939 in New York City, and he was a lifelong nudist. I went over to his house, in which he wore a robe, thankfully, in the early 2000s to view his collection and talk to him about Schonberg. And, it was an incredible place, filled, busting at the seams with movie memorabilia. But he would always answer the door for anybody who came over. And he was the one who had told me that he was Bert's manager, that Bert had done some early drawings for Famous Monsters of Filmland, and that through Forey, Bert was able to get connected to some movie projects. So he didn't specifically say Roger Corman, but because I didn't really know what Bert was involved with movie-wise up to that point. But 2 out of the 3 films that Bert worked on as an artist were Corman films. So I'm assuming the connection came through Forrest J. Ackerman.
What was the third one?
The Brain Eaters, I believe it's called.
The Brian Eaters.
Wow.
Yeah. I think Premature Burial and House of Usher were Poe-related films that were directed by Roger Corman. And The Brain Eaters may have been produced by Corman. I'm not really sure. I'll have to go back on IMDb or go through my old notes. I do have one of the lobby cards from it. I love it. Sorry, go ahead.
No, please.
Oh, I was just going to say, I love the glowing eyeballs in the poster design of the female figure on the cover. it's somewhat reminiscent of the Medusa Sea Witch on the poster of Night Tide from 1960 with Marjorie Cameron, but it also is reminiscent of the glowing eyes of the figure on the poster of Premature Burial. So either they were all kind of aware that this was a new way of presenting horror movies in terms of posters, or they were just directly influenced by Bert himself, who was already drawing or painting figures with glowing eyes or with hollowed out eyes. So it seems like Bert was having this kind of major influence in Los Angeles, from coffeehouse murals to poster design, to just, the areas of interest that his artwork had. But yet he was, for some reason, just a little bit too far out in terms of the art world. So.
So, what's next for Burt Shonberg? Do you think the world's ready to explore him further? I mean, how many pieces out there are there? I've heard rumors that Ringo Starr might have a large collection. Do you know if that's true?
Me or Steven?
Either or.
I like to let Brian speak. That's his plan.
I think there's about 100 paintings by Bert that are in existence. Marshall has a handful. George Greif's daughter, Laura Greif de Kloot, has some of the best works. Obviously, George Clayton Johnson's family had the works that are now in the show, and that constitutes a very, very important body, maybe just as many masterpieces as the Greif archive. Ringo Starr, who obviously met Bert through his association with George Greif, because George was the American tour manager for the Beatles from 1964 to 66. Ringo purchased, I believe, 3 or 4 paintings by Bert and 2 drawings. They came up for auction about 5 years ago or 6 years ago in Bonhams, and his son, who was a drummer in the later iterations of the band Oasis, ended up buying them. So I guess they're still in the family. I know Marshall had told me that he'd made a bid on them, but those are really the most important archives, I would say, is Marshall, the archive that you have there at the museum presently, Laura Greif's archive, and Ringo Starr's. Unfortunately, the collection that Bert had left to Ledru has gone missing. Ledru died, I believe, in 2007 or 2008, and both Marshall and myself made an attempt to reach out to Ledru's girlfriend and see if she would be willing to sell the collection, or at least allow us to scan it. It was mostly drawings and cutouts. There was no original paintings or anything, but it was a massive portfolio with probably 400 or 500 different drawings that Bert did. So including one half of the book that he wrote called Out Here, which was almost like a graphic novel or a comic about his first experiences with LSD 25 in 1960. That's where you first start seeing the faceless humanoid, who sometimes has a world inside of his head, or sometimes there's a cosmic world that's outside. And that becomes like a really important figure in Bert's cosmology. Marjorie Cameron had a faceless humanoid in one of her drawings called Peyote Vision from 1955. And of course, the faceless humanoid looms large in the canon of Di Chirico. But Schonberg did something a little bit different with it, in that he kind of took the landscape that was outside and had it move into the face, so that this translucent area in there shows that, kind of as above, so below, or as without, so within. Schonberg was also really good friends with this guy, Sheldon Jaman, who was a follower of Gurdjieff, who coined the phrase as above, so below. And Schonberg even had those words written on the canvas of one of his paintings. So that's a definite link, we know, to somebody who was an occultist.
Wow. So I would love to just share a couple pictures of, we've had a little preview of the shows like the last day or so. So I've wanted to share just people admiring the show. You can kind of see.
What a great shot, man.
Yeah, I mean, people are, they're getting sucked into the world of Burt Shonberg. So it's, it has been such a pleasure and honor to share these with people. And today, the official opening is in 14 minutes. And I don't know, it's really such an honor to host you here, Brian. I'm hoping in the next couple months we could have you back as people come in and they experience the art. I think I'm going to have more questions, more insight over on our end, you know, because this is all very fresh and new for us here.
Right.
If you know what I mean, it's so overwhelming when you go in there and you see these pieces, and it's in a museum that's already filled top to bottom. There's not a square inch that doesn't have artifacts and ephemera of the arcane in it. And now I guess the best way to describe it would be a macro dose of cosmic wisdom and knowledge has just been thrown onto our walls. And
well, it blends in perfectly with your whole ecosystem there.
It blends in perfectly, but I have to say that sometimes it takes a little while to find your center, right? Find the balance. So it's really been a thrill and an honor. Let's see. Looks like we have a comment, perhaps a question here. Excellent and insightful chat here. Good luck with your opening and exhibit. Thank you, Jason Myers. Jason is a friend of the museum. He pops in from time to time and explores the metaphysical art. So thank you. All right. Well,
one thing I wanted to say is that the first piece that you have in the show is a watercolor from 1954. We saw it in the far
yes.
left of one of the pictures that you put up. That's the earliest known painting that we have of Bert and or by Bert, and it kind of coheres. Yeah, you can see it in the far left. It kind of coheres a little bit with another artist that Steven has in his collection named Wolfgang Grasse or Wolfgang Grass, who also documented using known art styles like late Gothic art, but in this case you have Burt Shonberg using kind of almost patent surrealism to express his experience in the Korean War. So it is of a soldier experiencing the surreal drama or the psychic split that happens when a person is in war. And Grasse did the same thing in a lot of his paintings. He expressed the feeling of having been a child in World War II using the style of Albert Dürer or the late Gothic printmakers or artists. So I think that's a really interesting thing about Bert, is that from the get-go, there was an autobiographical element to his work. And I think as we get to know more of his work, as we get to study things as closely as we are now with this show, the process of him revealing himself within his work, I think, will become more apparent as time goes by. And maybe to answer your other question about what's next, I would personally love to do a whole retrospective of Bert's artwork with all of the major collections combined together in one show, as well as some works under glass of people that knew Bert. I have 6 or 7 pieces that were done by different people who were either an influence or Bert or Bert was a mentor to them. And they also, even though I don't think they're as profound as Bert's work, they shed a lot of light on him. They shed a lot of light on the circle of people that he was involved with. So that's really what I would like to see, is a full retrospective of his entire canon that also includes some of his students and friends, so that we really get a sense that there was something going on there, that you know, whether or not he was rejected in his time, there was still something powerful happening on the ground that he was able to document. And that's really what my essay in the catalog is about, is the creative circle that he grew out of. and how this artwork really reflected the times in which it was made. It may look sort of outside of time, it may look esoteric in a way, but I also think it responds to the times in which he was making it, both for the interest in psychedelics and experimental ways of thinking, the counterculture, which was rising up, teen culture, which came out of rock and roll, and also the be here now ethos that came in the aftermath of the atom bomb and his own war experience. So as far as I'm concerned, we're just getting started with Bert, but you guys did a wonderful job, and I really appreciate everything you put into it.
Well, thank you so much. It's an honor to work with you. And Brian, we had somebody ask, how do you pronounce your last name?
Chidester.
Chidester. Okay. So
but whatever, I don't care.
That's for you. And any final words there of wisdom, Steven, before we sign off?
Just magnificent day, and historically important for this artist and for American culture in general, that this artist is finally brought out in a way that his integrity is where it belongs, in the forefront. And, that's not to say that there's necessarily that he's being seen through an academic lens, but I think there's a really great balance here between Brian's proficiency in terms of articulating his sentiments about the artist and the artist's cultural importance, and the positioning of the artist in the Buckland Museum. That this work would look great in a white cube museum for sure, but I think it really comes alive in your environment, and for that reason, it was a choice venue for this exhibition, and the response in the press has been astonishing. I mean, just in the last week, we've had like 7 or 8, pretty major pieces of coverage, and all of them have been very empathetic towards the work. So my gratitude is extended to you, Steven, and certainly my gratitude is extended towards Brian for, tenaciously and unrelentingly bringing this project to fruition and to perfection, to the best of our abilities. And not to sound like a broken record, but the object of the exercise here is to present the artist's integrity in the forefront. And I am overwhelmed with gratitude.
Same thing. I get really moved a lot of times when I think about when individuals like the two of you are willing to share your talents, ideas, and toys here with the collection. It means the world to me. And thank you for what you do, Steven. Thank you for what you do, Brian. Much appreciated. So we have 5 minutes before the opening of the exhibit at noon today here at the Buckland Museum of Witchcraft and Magic. It is up to you. Go on the website, bucklandmuseum.org. Buy tickets to see it. I don't care where you have to drive from. People drive all the time from Minneapolis, from Iowa, from, let's see, no Canadians this year. Hopefully next year, right?
Well, the borders have been closed, hasn't they?
Well, yeah, exactly. So, something came up. But people come from all over. Guests from Chicago, guests from San Francisco, all ascend upon our museum. And now, come see this. It's beautiful. It's incredible. It'll change your life, change your mind, change your headspace. So, like I said, order tickets on our website, bucklandmuseum.org. When you're there, you can order a copy of the catalog, which should be shipping out on August 1st. This show goes to November 1st. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thanks for all the comments. And one thing I want to leave you all with is stay witchy, my friends.